Hello, Frizzle fellas. So, a study in drowning has bewitched me, and I desperately need someone to talk about it with, so here goes that. The book starts, "It began as all things did, a girl on the shore, terrified and desirous." And that is the first of many quotes we get from 𝐒𝐿𝐻𝐈𝐿, which is a meta story inside of this novel, and it becomes wildly plot important. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the setting. The setting and genre of this novel are kind of hard to wrestle with. The setting feels like 1930s, 40s-ish Wales, but not quite. It's a world where they have cars and typewriters and phones, but no computers. And it's a world where they've had lots of wars, where they're on the cusp of maybe a new war, but it's a little bit same old feeling. And it's also a world that's pretty sexist, but is slowly coming out of that. Because while they don't let women into the prestigious literature college at the university, they do let women into some of the other programs, and that's where we find our main character, Effie. Having been snubbed from the literature degree, she is now an architecture student, and she is the only woman in the college. Near the beginning of the book, when I was still trying to figure out what the setting was and what the feeling was, one of the things that placed me so well is a fellow student gives Effie his number, and it says that it's 7 digits. So right from the get-go, I knew that this is a world with phones, but kind of pre-cell phones. And that narrowed down the range so quickly for me, and I loved even like these little details that are so... This book, you just gotta read it to like feel it. It is so steeped in perfect atmosphere and all of these little details that help place you, that help you to connect better with our character, Effie. And the thing you gotta know about Effie, this is like the linchpin of this entire book, is that Effie is an unreliable narrator, is that Effie struggles with hallucinations, is that she has antipsychotic meds, and the thing that she most often hallucinates is the fairy king stalking her. And that's one of the reasons why the genre of this novel is so hard to place, because throughout the entire book, you're just unsure if the fairy king is real or not, because there's just enough evidence given to you to make you feel like, okay, maybe actually magic is real in this world, and there's just enough doubt in Effie's story, in Effie's ability to distinguish fact from fiction, that is that evidence even real? And I love how this doubt in the narrator and this wondering of, can we trust her or not? It's inviting the reader to get involved in one of the main themes of this book, which is kind of the power of believing women. Because Effie has a little bit of trauma in her past, where before the book starts, she was assaulted by one of her teachers. And everyone kind of knows about it, but no one actually believes her as the victim. And this, of course, has made school incredibly emotionally difficult for her and made her not feel safe there. And at the heart of it is the problem of people not believing her. And then the readers also get to participate in this, do I believe Effie? Because she is so much craving for people to believe her. But then also the book goes out of its way to show how unreliable her narration is, that she's hallucinating things. And what do you want to do? Most things in Effie's life revolve around this conflict. Both of her story in telling people about the Fairy King and her story in telling people about her assault, where she desperately wants to stand up for herself and really convince people, but she also doesn't want to stand out and doesn't want to be seen as the crazy one. She wants to believe herself and believe in these hallucinations, but she also wants to be normal and just take her meds and try to shove that part of herself aside. And this book is so perfect at orchestrating these emotions in Effie that I was always really feeling for her. I got so attached to this protagonist so quickly, and I wanted desperately to believe her. To say, yes, definitely, there's a fairy king stalking you. Because I saw how much in the story people's unbelief in her truths hurt her. How they crippled her emotionally and socially. So that's our stage. Now, what is our inciting incident? Effie, as an architecture student, applies for and gets picked to do this project that's out in the middle of nowhere on the seaside, which is designing a renovation for her favorite author of all time's house. The author's dead. His son is taking care of the house and his son wants to fix it up. The reason that this guy was her favorite author is because he wrote the novel 𝐋𝐈𝐍𝐿𝐒. And 𝐋𝐈𝐍𝐿𝐒 is like the national treasure. Everyone loves this book. It is the bestseller. But it's especially important to Effie because it's the story of a girl that outwits and defeats the fairy king. And she feels so connected to that story because it feels like it's also her story. So Effie, this is the chance of a lifetime. She gets to go to the house where her favorite novel was written. She gets to work on this project and she gets to get away from this terrible university environment where everyone doesn't believe her and she hates it there. So win, win, win. She gets to go out on this little quest, but then finds even more problems because out there on the southern coast, on the windy cliffs, the magic of the Fairy King is even stronger and her problems only get worse in that department. Additionally, it turns out she's not the only student that gets to go to this manor house to do a project. There's also a literature student there who she quickly does not get along with. His name is Preston and he's very sarcastic and disdainful and very tight-laced, not the type of person to believe someone's tales about the Fairy King. So of course, this ends up being academic rivals to lovers, and I loved that part. I loved seeing them come together, how they balanced each other, Effie's wildness and Preston's rigorous, straight-laced, looking for facts mentality. It felt very opposites attract, especially as you get more and more into Preston's background and see how he has also been ostracized by the students at the university. And the longer I read this book and we were just at this old, dilapidated mansion on the coast, I loved the tone of this book even more because it is like drippingly gothic. It feels like drowning in this book. Everything is heightened and melodramatic and poetic descriptions of all of the scenery. It's a cloying book that sticks with you, that plays up all of the emotions and all of the weird things that are happening to 11. It feels like you took like a historical dark academia book and then smashed it together with like a trapped in the fairy realm fantasy and just pushed it all together until you had this messy, gorgeous novel. And in a lot of ways, it's a love letter to the power of fiction and stories itself because so much of this book is exploring how the novel 𝐋𝐈𝐍𝐿𝐒 has affected both Effie and Preston and everyone else involved. But on top of all of that, when I really, really fell in love and was head over heels obsessed with this book was this scene. So this scene comes when Preston has been giving Effie a ride around town. And they've been chatting and Preston has asked some prying questions that Effie is just emotionally done with. So this is how she reacts. "You can let me out here," Effie said. "I'll walk." Preston pulled over without a word. Effie tried to open the door, but the handle just flapped uselessly. She pulled it over and over again, frustration rising to a fever pitch, her face burning. "It's locked," Preston said. His voice was tight. It was a petulant sort of stubbornness that kept Effie yanking at the handle, even though the door wouldn't budge. After several more moments, she heard Preston draw a breath, and then he reached over, fumbling for the lock. Like that scene of like the tantalizing tension between these two characters that I know are starting to really like each other and fall in love, that scene of Effie struggling with a thing that she cannot overcome, that she can't think clearly about because she's just like a hot mess sometimes. And you're just waiting to see how Preston is going to react to this, if he's going to explode as well. And like all of that emotional fuse just always ready to burn and go. And that's the entire book. And I loved this scene because it was a scene of someone getting out of a car, right? But it had me on the edge of my seat. That's what this book did to me, is even the littlest moments I was so excited for because I was really invested in every single little bit of this drama. So as Effie and Preston get to know each other and bond as they're both staying in this mansion in the middle of nowhere, they also decide to start solving a mystery together, trying to look through the old papers of the author and such to try to get to the bottom of this question about his works and how they came to be. And here's the thing about that mystery. The mystery is not like a mystery novel type of mystery where you've got red herrings and setbacks and surprises and reveals. This is a very simple mystery. This is the kind of mystery where every single time a main character looks for a clue, they like find the exact clue that they need right there. It is not difficult at all. The plot is like smooth sailing central. And that's because the focus of the book is so much on Effie's emotional journey that the outside plot doesn't always actually matter. And it's just a thing for them to be doing as Effie finds out more about herself and this world around her. I think one of the reasons that the mystery is so easy is also because of like the genre that this is shooting for. At its heart, this book is a romance in a few different ways. The most important way isn't that and rivals to lovers I was just telling you about, but in the way of like the old romantic epics. Like the premise is dark academia, the tone is very gothic, but the genre harkens back most to a romantic epic. And this book discusses that as 𝐂𝐲𝐈𝐍𝐿 is also like a romantic epic. Like one of those old-timey stories about like knights slaying dragons. And of course the knight is just going to perfectly do everything because it's just a story of triumph. And that's what this book is like. This is a story about Effie's triumph around the mystery and around her own angst. In a romantic epic, you get a big success at the end, and that is what this book is. After so many chapters and pages of this darkness, of this drowning, of this evil lurking feeling, you finally get to the end and it's just happy, unequivocal success. And it's not Effie slaying a dragon, but it's Effie slaying her own personal problems and also getting to the bottom of this mystery altogether. The plot of this book is easy. The hard part is Effie finding emotional stability. The hard part is Effie learning to stand up for herself, and the hard part is the feminism of it all. So yes, I did feel like the ending was a little trite, felt a little cheap after such a heavy book. But also, after a book that feels so much like drowning, having an ending that is a breath of fresh air was so nice and somehow made me love the book even more, even though it kind of didn't feel like it fit all the way. This book is playing with so many ideas. It's playing with like the real world versus the fae world. It's playing with the new progress versus the old traditions and magic. And I keep coming back to the way that water is used as a symbol in this book. Because this middle of nowhere town that they go to on the coast, it is in constant fear of drowning, where the water is washing away more and more of the cliff every year, and people have already died of this in the past. Where sometimes the tide is moving slower and slower in over the course of decades, and sometimes there's a storm and everything is washed away all at once. And it feels so much like the water is the force of otherness. One of the things that Effie is wrestling with, where she wants to, in some ways, get away from her otherness and become normal. She wants to leave this cursed coast and go back to the tame, modern, not magical northern lands where she's from. But in other ways, the people of that southern coast wouldn't leave it for anything because it's part of their heritage. It's part of who they are at their core, and the same goes for Effie. This coast and the traditions there is part of what separates those people from the rest of the nation, part of what ostracizes them, and yet it's also their strength, and the same thing goes for Effie and her otherness as she comes to accept and use it throughout this book. I love this book so much. I want to reread it now. Like, I can't wait for more people to pick this up because I need more people to talk about this with. I've read one other book by this author, Ava Reid, The Wolf and the Woodsman, and I loved that one as well. I loved this one more. And I think I loved this one more because the plot's a little bit more straightforward. The other ones was sometimes felt very roundabout and circuitous. But if you're looking for more like this, I would recommend The Wolf and the Woodsman. But for a study in drowning, I gave it 5 stars. Definitely one of the best books I've read in a long time. Thanks for watching.